Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I just want to say thank you to the IMI for inviting me to this event. Clearly this is a hugely important event in the evolution of the Indian music industry. And I'm hearing a lot of the things here today that we've been hearing in the last 10 years of Merlin. So just to give you a very quick introduction as to what it is that we do and why Merlin was created. Merlin was created just over 10 years ago by a group of independent labels around the world who are looking, albeit with different environments and different challenges, at the evolution of the business into a digital one and what that was going to mean for them, their ability to compete, their ability to get revenues, and their ability to have a future of their business. Today, I'm not really here to sell you anything, but I'm here more to try and share some insights into what we've seen and what we've learnt in the last decades, both in major music markets, but also in what people call the emerging music markets, to try and maybe put into context some of the themes that we've heard about today, backed up by some facts and figures. So really, I think the first thing that I want to touch on, and I hope you can see the slides, is everybody asks is, where's the money? And the money for us is accelerating enormously at the moment. So in the first 9 years, it took the first 9 years of operating Merlin to make our first $1 billion. So, which is an extraordinary number in and of itself, given Merlin represents only independent record labels and distributors from around the world. We currently represent about 800 companies from about 55 countries around the world. But as you can see, this infusion of value into our industry, and these figures are audio streaming only. So this is new generation audio streaming revenues only. This doesn't include downloads, doesn't include public performance or any of the other revenue streams. So as you can see, there's this incredible acceleration happening, that for it to take only 12 months to achieve 50% of the revenues that we did in over 9 years should give you some indication of what the speed of evolution of this market is. And the thing that I think is exciting us most at the moment is this evolution is not just coming from the major music markets. We're seeing an enormous growth in the last 3 or 4 years in particular in markets that were of very, very low value to us. Now, as part of our 10th anniversary, we did a survey of the companies that we represent from around the world to try and take a snapshot of how their business looks in the current world. And this slide takes a little minute to think about, but I think illustrates, follows on some of the themes we've just heard on the previous panel, but also I think brings a new element into this discussion, which we think from the point of view of how mobile and how global and how far spread the Indian diaspora is across all of the various Indian regions across so many parts of the world, is another factor I think that is going to drive more value back into this marketplace, not just within your own market. So the chart on the left here shows what percentage of our people make more money outside of their home territory than inside of their own territory. And this is across our entire membership from 55 countries. As you can see, over the last 3 years, between 39 and 42% of the companies we represent now make more money outside their market than they do inside their market. The slide on the right, or the chart on the right, shows how many people do that in the traditional business. So in the physical and download business, that number's around 17 to 18%. So the shape of the business has changed. So much as the innovation of streaming and mobile phones has changed the way that people access music, it's also changed the actual shape of the business. The shape of the business was very much dictated in most markets by an enormous concentration of value with the hits, a little bit of music in the middle, and then a long tail that really struggled to get into the marketplace. And if you were really lucky, you could make some money outside your home territory. The fact that any piece of music you put onto Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play is available to any consumer anywhere in the world immediately has changed the shape of this business. And I think from the perspective of the dialogue that you're having here at the IMI and then within the Indian industry, I think that's a really core thing to understand, not just the potential and the challenges that you're finding within your market, but what those opportunities that sit outside the market are. So if we look here and just to touch back on that slide. So we talk about this, this enormous shift from domestic businesses to international businesses. I think the other thing that's happening with this is a global phenomenon. So music's not just moving from the West to the East or from the West to Latin America, it's actually cross-pollinating. So if I look back at the start of Merlin, we were making zero money from Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Colombia. Those 4 markets are now inside our top 20 earning markets, and Brazil is now our number 6 highest earning markets. And the debate that I heard when I first went to Brazil maybe 6 or 7 years ago to talk to a group of people not unlike this was very similar to what we're hearing here. It was a market beset by piracy. It was a market where there was very little credit card or payment systems that we have in the West. The penetration of broadband was very low. Data was expensive. Yet, in this short period of time, they've gone from being nowhere in our business to being our 6th biggest earner. They've overtaken countries for us like France, which used to be, one of the countries really at the core of our business. So this is what I'm talking about when the shape of the business is changing. It's not just changing in terms of the consumption and the way you get to music, it's actually changing in terms of where value comes from and where, as a rights holder, you can extract value for yourself. So just put 2 examples up here, and we are working with some Indian companies, but I don't have enough data on this yet to really be diving as deep as we can into this. But we've been recently in the last 2 or 3 years working with some Japanese labels who themselves have been struggling to deal with the emergence of the streaming market. As some of you might know, Japan has been quite resistant to the entrance of the streaming services into the market because they still have quite a strong physical infrastructure. But we have some very forward-thinking Japanese labels that we're working with. So if you look at the chart on the right, on my left, your left, is a Japanese label that releases only Japanese rock music in the Japanese language, which you would think is a very, very domestic genre and a very, very, very domestic style of music. Yet what we found is 50% or 49% of their streaming is actually coming from outside their country. And when we talked to them before we did this study and asked them where they thought their streaming activity would be, they pretty much thought it would be USA, maybe a little bit in Canada, and then maybe a little bit in the UK and across Europe. What surprised us all is almost 18% of the consumption of their music comes from Latin America. No Japanese rock label ever thought that they were going to have a business in Latin America. Yet, as you can see, it's now a bigger part of their business than the rest of Southeast Asia is for this particular label, which turns it on its head. Similarly, the chart on the right shows an Italian label, which again releases music only in the Italian language, and there's a little bit more of a pattern that shows that obviously across the rest of Europe, as Italian people migrate across borders, there's a reasonably large portion of consumption of their music there. But even for them, you're seeing significant revenues coming from North America, significant revenues coming from Latin America, and even a little bit coming from Australia, New Zealand, and the Asian markets. So if you sat with that label 5 years ago and you asked them if they ever thought they would be making reasonable amounts of revenue from the Latin American market in their business, they would have thought you were crazy. So what does this mean to India? And why does this matter? I think for me, what really has struck me in the last day is as you're clearly moving to a world where you're reinventing the way your industry works, you're reinventing the value proposition that you're trying to generate within your own market with what we heard this morning with the new societies and the new ways that they're being run, the lobbying with government to try and get more support for music as part of the creative industries, is that India fits into a pattern that we've seen repeat over and over again in markets that are challenged and managed to turn that challenge into opportunity. And I really think from our perspective, the level of optimism that I'm feeling in terms of what we heard on that last panel, for example, in terms of how much value and how quickly you think it could come in to your business is really something I think that needs to be at the centre of thinking in terms of how you as individual business owners, and particularly those of you who are operating outside of these much, much bigger companies, need to think about. So I'm just going to finish by just running through what we think the 5 key trends that we've seen emerge in the last 10 years of our organisation are, and why they matter to you in this market, and why we think that they're signs that point to a positive future rather than a negative future for this industry. The first is that this availability of music globally on these streaming platforms has not only changed the value proposition, it's actually changed the consumer experience. So as a consumer in India, you all of a sudden potentially have access via your Google Play subscription to listen to music from Italy. Vice versa, as a young music consumer in São Paulo, there's no reason you couldn't be discovering music that's coming from this country in your listening, into your listening behaviour. And what that does is that's flattened out the marketplace. So whereas the market was always controlled by the global major labels who had the financial muscle to create global megastars, to make sure they dominated radio, they dominated television, and they dominated retail through these very narrow channels because consumers only had access to radio, television, and the press. Now consumers are totally unbundled. You can see it here. I mean, I was walking through South Bombay yesterday, and you can see practically every person who's sitting in a car is watching YouTube or is watching something on their device. That content can come from anywhere in the world. We're seeing this cross-pollination of culture happening at a level we've never really seen before. So I think this entry into the marketplace and this ability to participate not only in your own market but in the global marketplace should be an extraordinarily exciting opportunity for Indian labels in particular. And I'm just going to stick with that for 1 minute, because one thing that struck me, coming here is I did a little bit of research in terms of what was available to look at how Indian music is performing on the global channels that I'm, aware of. The amazing thing for me is if you look at music channels on YouTube globally, I think 4 or 5 of the top 20 of those music channels are Indian channels, which kind of makes sense because, it's Bollywood content, a lot of it, it's audio visual, and it's obviously reaching a very big global market, and you have to be in a global market to be ranking that highly within those rankings. But if I look at the top 200 or 500 or 1,000 playlists on Spotify or on Apple Music, or even in terms of what's happening on Google Play, I don't think there's one playlist in there that replicates that. And the reason that's, I think, something to think about for me is if I look at the Merlin business and we look at that growth that we've seen in the business, for every $1 we earn on YouTube, we earn $10 from our audio partners, which means if those Indian channels that are performing so well on YouTube could achieve 10% of what they're achieving on YouTube in the audio market, they would double their business immediately. If they got anywhere near to the levels of consumption that we're seeing across the world in our business, that would increase by tenfold. So the potential and the earnings that I think that are there, once there's a way of actually navigating this music into the audio part of the market, there's an enormous amount of value sitting there, I think, waiting to be tapped into. And as Indian rights holders, I think that should be, you know, an incredibly exciting opportunity there for you. The second point is growth is from the heart, not from the head. And what that means is when we analyse consumer behaviour in the streaming market, and in the audio streaming market in particular, what we're seeing is that people who are active users of these streaming platforms are really diving deeper than they ever have in the traditional music markets. As I said earlier, you know, there's kids in São Paulo listening to music from Japan or from India. There's this cross-pollination happening. And the heart of the market right now, we think, is the music that's being created by smaller labels in their own territory that's connecting with subcultures around the world. The most obvious example of that is electronic music. And if you look at the growth of what they call EDM as a genre, without the limitations of language, we're seeing incredible cross-pollination between music producers or DJs or electronic musicians, whatever you want to call them, in different continents around the world who are finding connections with each other through these platforms in ways that they never would have before. And what that creates is this core, this point of gravity, where all of a sudden there's a global community being formed around a particular kind of music that would have been practically impossible in the pre-internet age. So this notion of a heart, of building culture, of building opportunities for the kind of music that you're producing, and the ability to tap into people that you think share your vision or share your passion, is going to create, I think, some incredible new music and incredibly exciting creative projects in the years to come. The third point I've obviously touched on, which is the rethinking of where your market is, should start right now. Clearly, that's already happening for Indian music in terms of YouTube. But I think as you try and shape the future of your business, much as the issues that were being discussed on this panel are incredibly important in terms of building the next phase of the domestic market here, there's really a global market there for you, and you should be strategizing alongside how you navigate your domestic market, what this new dynamic means for you, how you can tap into it, how you can learn about it. The fourth point is what we call the sweet spot. So we talked a little, we heard a little bit in the previous panel about the challenge to conversion and what the tipping point is in terms of that percentage of population. What we have found is once audio streaming takes hold in a market and you get to a point of conversion where, you know, it's not even 10% of the population, but you get, a couple of million users in a market really starting to drive that consumption, share about it on social media, and drive that sort of tipping point, is once people are inside these systems, they're diving deeper and deeper. So the longer people live on these platforms, the more music they listen to, the more that product becomes part of their lives, the more that they now have music not just at home or in the car on the radio, but they carry it with them everywhere as they travel, as they commute, as they sit at home on the weekend. And the more you engage with these platforms, and there's those of you who know, the more of these rabbit holes you can go down to try and find either music you used to love or music you think you might love. So I think this success of independent repertoire on these platforms, combined with the fact that we have hungry consumers looking for more music and looking for more satisfaction, is again another point that I think should point to enormous opportunity for those of you who are operating in this market. And I think the final point is what we're starting to hear here in some of the presentations, which is this influx of value, this globalization of your business, this realization that you're connecting with consumers that you could never possibly get to before, is writing an enormous amount of optimism in our organization. To go back to this survey we just did of our members looking at the last decade of their business, 85% of the people that we represent say they're very optimistic about the future of their business. So having lived through all of this period of transition and losing the physical market and losing the download market and trying to navigate what this new world means, has led them to this point where they're starting to understand that, yes, it's a challenge. Yes, there's hurdles to jump over. Yes, some people are going to win and some people are going to lose. But in the overall picture, it's actually driving enormous amount of additional value into the marketplace, which gives us as an organisation enormous optimism in terms of how we're seeing the global market develop. I mean, I've spent more time in the last 2 or 3 years in Latin America and Southeast Asia and now in India and in China and markets that were really off to the side of our business and now very much front and centre in our day-to-day thinking. We hope that India is the next cab off that rank. We think it deserves to be. We think there's a musically engaged culture here of people who clearly love music, consume a lot of it. We saw some statistics about this morning. I hope that optimism infects all of you and that you take that infection into the next part of your business and the next part of the evolution of the market. And I really wish you all the best. And I look forward to coming back in a year or two and to hearing the good news stories. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.